Welcome to Taxed and Confused, the podcast where tax administration meets real talk. We are your hosts, Lizzie and Lisa, two tax nerds on a mission to decode the rules, demystify the system, and maybe even make you laugh along the way. From tax returns to objections and everything in between, we're diving into the world where the burden of proof is on you, not the ATO. That's right, this isn't criminal law. You're guilty until proven compliant. But just a quick heads up, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It's not tax advice, and it's definitely not a substitute for professional guidance tailored to your situation. So brace for bureaucracy and join us as we explore the weird, the wonky, and the wildly important world of tax admin. Because when it comes to tax, we're all a little taxed and confused. So today we are providing a basic overview of the tax administration system in Australia. So let's get into it, Lisa. What is the difference between tax and tax administration?
Well, it's a good question because we're applying tax law. But even myself as a professional, I'm not applying tax law all the time. I probably spend like 20% doing the tax law. The other 80% is all on the admin. It's actually getting the things working. It's like, say, I always love car analogies, and I'm sure I'll talk a lot about car analogies during these podcasts. So like you're given a car, but you need the license and the rules on the road to work around it. All right. And that's how I look at the administration. And there's a lot of fingers and a lot of pies with the administration. The main one we talk about is the Australian Tax Office, run by the Commissioner of Tax, Rob Heffernan, who's just started his new tenure there, who's a public servant. So it's just another public servant for Service Department. So if you've had any dealings with Services Australia, it's the same sort of thing dealing with a public service department, which is the Australian Tax Office, and they're in charge of policing our tax laws. Lizzie, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. So in doing that police work, what are they actually up to? What is the Australian Tax Office actually doing? What's their specific role?
Well, I think their main role is to collect the tax revenue. I mean, that's what they are. You know, they're the tax bank, right? They're bringing in all the money that everyone owes, all the taxpayers owe to the Australian government. So the government can then spend money on, well, we do the right thing, roads, schools, health, their own salaries, submarines, rare earths, you name it, wherever they give the money to. So when the politicians say we're giving $1 billion here, $1 billion there, that money's coming out of what the Australian Tax Office collects. So that's really their main function. And we've all lived through COVID. And with COVID, everyone was being a bit nice to each other. So the money wasn't as aggressively getting collected, where now there's a lot of debt on the books, right, of undisputed, don't they call it, undisputed tax debt. And so now they're up to collecting it all. So if anyone out there's got a tax debt, you're probably going to expect to get a phone call, an email, or a letter from the ATO saying, hey, do you want to pay that? Or anything more aggressive than that, like any other debt and debt collector would. So that's their main job. But of course, their other job is to enforce the tax laws. So they're really governed by, well, we've got the Administration Act, haven't we? So we've got the Administration Act that they're implementing on really enforcing the great income tax assessment acts that we know and love.
Yeah. So they're not really making law. They're enforcing and they're collecting on behalf of the government. But sometimes people describe law as in LORE. Do you have anything to add on that perspective?
Yeah, that's why I had a bit of a laugh. Look, tax laws, let me put it this way. So who makes our laws? The politicians. Okay, our people up in Canberra, up in Parliament House. We'll talk in other podcasts about how it all works. But because when any tax laws change, you're always going to have winners and losers, because that's the way it works, because they've still got to try and get, the politicians still have to get enough money into pay for everything they promise with the country. Because of that, tax laws don't change very much. If we look at the last really big thing that happened, we might nearly have to go back to GST, really, and that's in year 2000. That was the most significant tax change we've had, and that was, oh, God, that's 25 years ago or more, right?
That's really scary.
Well, I know, but people listening to this podcast, Lizzie, you'll be going, well, I wasn't born then. The students
They haven't
teach.
experienced a world without GST.
Yeah. And I mean, if I'm older than you, so I can say this, but it was really quite funny around that time because we had this thing called the Y2K bug as well.
Yep.
So we were going through the 1999 to 2000 clickover, and everyone thought planes were going to fall out of the sky and everything. But that's how far back we've got to go to, for really big tax reform. So let me just go back to get back on target of what we're talking about, because I always drag on and go down rabbit holes, is that because the tax laws don't change very much because of the winner and loser aspect, and remember, it's the government that makes the law, and then we've got the judges that will make our case-based law as well. The ATO then have this bridging role where they sort of say, well, this is our interpretation of the law, and is that making law or not? And I'm finding over the past few years, as we've had a big change in the way we do business and the way that we do things, which is, we'll be talking about AI and future potties, and we'll talk about, everything to do with the digital economy and, how we matters through our interest in blockchain and cryptocurrencies, that are the LAW law keeping up with how we're operating in the real world? And so what we're finding is the ATO as an administrator is saying, this is our interpretation. So they're the ones that are policing it. So it's a bit like, let's do a car analogy again. You're driving along and you're over 40 or something and someone pulls you over. That's the rules if you're in a 40K zone. I always find it very hard to keep to 40K because it's very hard, right? But it's then do you have a negotiation with the police officer of, oh, what's your interpretation of 40? What's not your interpretation of 40 Ks an hour? So that's the kind of conversations we have with the ATO. Yeah. So they are starting to go down that pathway, I think, of making law.
And ultimately, there's a certainty, a clarity, a practicality to having that guidance to lean on. Taxpayers need to be supported, and a lot of things change at quite a fast pace, particularly when we get into the technology sector. So having things evolving really quickly, to have something like the ATO being in a position to provide some clarity is actually somewhat desirable. However, the counter to that guidance or that LORE can shift and change with time too. So, things can change quickly, including what the ATO's perspective is, particularly as issues go through the court. So, there's some pros and cons to that expectation of guidance, but it's certainly, we see often issues turning to whether there's rulings on particular topics to create that certainty, to understand the risk profile of clients and expectations there, so we know we can swim between the flags and have comfort in our, and that we are complying in a way that is consistent with what the administrator is doing.
That's exactly right. It's a risk-based approach, Lizzie. It really is. Because, going back to my first premise of the role of the ATO is to collect our consolidated revenue so the government can fund things, their position will always be on the side of more revenue if they can argue at that. I often say the house always wins. If you're looking at asking the ATO for something that's 50-50, they'll urge on the side of the 50 that is going to be more revenue to them. But of course, we are in a self-assessment tax system. As you said, the burden of proof is on the taxpayer, as you said in the opening introduction. So it's very much, we're going to ask the ATO for their opinion, or the ATO is going to give their opinion on the application of the law. They don't make the law, but we can still use our own interpretation and take the risk associated with it. And that's what it's all about. It's the risk associated with taking a particular position. Because when we lodge a tax return, it's self-assessment. In other words, we tell the ATO how much tax we have to pay. They actually don't tell us, hey, Lisa, pay 10 grand worth of tax. It's the other way around. So therefore, we're relying on, is that $10,000, for example, that I'm using, is that correct or not? The ATO can then say, all right, Lisa, prove it. And that's how the administration works.
Yeah. So touching on that, what are the responsibilities that taxpayers have in their tax compliance?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because, the scope of what we've decided to do is very much around the admin. And I wear a couple of hats, but let me just put on my tax agent hat. So I'm an intermediary between the taxpayer and the ATO. But of course, there's a lot of taxpayers that will lodge their own return without getting any help whatsoever. So it's totally their responsibility. They tick a declaration. As we know, no one reads the terms and conditions of anything. It'd be a really good idea to people read what they're signing when they declare something. They're declaring that it's all true and correct, what they're lodging. They're lodging within the tax rules. I'm just very high level explaining it. And they've got any documentation to support their position. They're really, I would say, the three tenets of what someone does. However, if they use an intermediary, because there's something like, what's the stats? 90? Is it 95%? You've looked at it, Lizzie. How many returns get done by tax agents versus?
I actually think I think it's somewhere between 60 and 70%.
Oh, is it that low? Yeah. I might be thinking about the business statistics.
Yeah, maybe I'm getting clicked. So put it in the show notes.
Yeah, exactly.
Like clarification on that.
That was questions without notice, everyone. With that, the responsibility is still on the taxpayer, right? We have an obligation to provide the right tax law, the right admin and things like that, but it's still the responsibility on the taxpayer. Really, I often say we're Switzerland to some extent because we're just trying to help. Trust me, I'm here to help. So the role of the taxpayer is very much making sure what they're submitting to the ATO is true and correct, just like anything you sign that you're going to be accountable for.
Which is quite fascinating, given it will be the tax agent who's generally expected to have the knowledge in tax law compared to the client. That's part of why one would attend a tax agent for compliance work. So it's quite fascinating that no matter who you use or how you lodge, it is the taxpayer that has that responsibility.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I look at it. Why would someone come to a tax agent? One is no one likes doing paperwork. Yeah. So part of our responsibility as being tax agent is we're going to make sure we're squeaky clean with the tax office to begin with. So we've got to make sure all our returns and our payments are up to speed, right? But of course, the cobbler's kids don't have any shoes. Sometimes we're a bit bad, but I always take my responsibilities right and I always do mine right. First one, I'm my most important client. That's how I look at it. So this is where we're thinking about why someone would come to us. It's sort of like they don't like doing paperwork. Otherwise, the other one, and this is where we see it at tax time every year, EFS, get a tax deduction, come and get a check for $932 or whatever. Everyone knows what I'm talking about if they watch free-to-air TV. Do you go to a tax agent to get the biggest deduction you can? Or do you go to the tax agent to get the right deduction? I much prefer saying right, not biggest, because, I have many clients that come to me, Lisa, I've got to pay tax. My mate across the road does it. You're not very good. And I'm going, well, that's not the right answer.
Yeah.
And, the analogy for that from another friend of mine says some people can eat a packet of Tim Tams and not put on weight. It's the same sort of analogy, right? So it just depends on your tax profile.
Yeah.
But then a lot of small business clients and things like that will come to a tax agent to just keep so they can sleep well at night. If they've got a good bond with their tax agent, they will then say, right, that's fine. But I think that a lot of us tax agents let ourselves down by not explaining things to our client. Now, there's always going to be clients that go, I don't want to hear about it, Lisa, you look after it. But because I also do a lot of teaching and a lot of educating, I like to explain to my clients why I'm doing something because they're the ones that are signing that it's true and correct. Okay. And there's a lot more responsibilities put on us as tax agents now as well to make sure we have qualified. I remember years and, 20, 30 years, 20 years ago, right? It was always you'd have your query sheet and you go asked and answered. The asked and answered response doesn't cut it anymore in the new regime that we've got. So that's how I feel about it.
And this comes down to good governance principles for tax agents, record keeping, quality management systems, same kind of issues of any running of any business, that risk kind of profiling of the tax agent as well. So returning to the taxpayer themselves, can you expand a little bit on the onus of proof? We've talked a little bit about the fact that the taxpayer does have to sign off on the client's work, but can you expand a little bit more deeply on what we actually mean by onus of proof here and how that perhaps links in with what the ATO's role is as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because when we lodge a tax return, it's just a whole set of numbers on a whole set of labels, isn't it, Lizzie? I mean, that's all that goes, right? Even if it's a business return, I get asked sometimes to say, can you provide the financials that have been submitted with the tax return? And I go, we don't do that. So in effect, what happens is, label 1, this amount, label 2, this amount. That's all that goes. However, there's a lot that goes into that number and a lot of proof that goes into that number. So there's two aspects to it, isn't it? With anything to do with tax, Lizzie, there's assessable income, allowable deductions, and there's proof on both sides, right? So income, expenses, whatever way you want to talk about it. I don't mind if we mix things with tax and accounting. I think it sometimes makes a little bit of sense, even though we know they're different and there can be adjustments and things like that. But the income coming in is very well data matched, okay? Because especially after COVID, the cash economy sort of really reduced, okay? We're tapping our phone or tapping our card on everything, which means there's all that traceability. Now, you can't open a bank account without a TFN, tax file number, so that all that information is available to the ATO. So the burden of proof on income seems to be is much if it's out there in the digital Amazon Web Services service somewhere in the world, it's all in, right? Where the income side of things can cause us grief is if someone's compromised your tax file number, which is happening a lot at the moment, or if someone's just made a mistake with tax file numbers and all of a sudden the ATO go, hey, Lizzie, you've got I'm using $10,000 a lot, $10,000 worth of interest. And you go, whoa, ATO, that's not mine. Right? Now, the joke with that one is that I'm happy to pay $10,000 worth of interest if you can give me the principal that it's based on, because it's not my money anyway, right? So where is what's that going to be? $10,000 worth of interest probably give me quite a few $100,000 worth of principal, right? So
I'm sure we'd all like that principle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly, right? So that's where that can come in. The other way is, of course, is crypto, right? So it's traceable, but is it traceable? Yeah, we know all the stories about crypto. Like if you've got $1 million worth of crypto, you've got to prove it, right? And that's as you said in the introduction. My favorite thing is, if I kill someone, you better find the body. But if they're accusing me of having $1 million of crypto, I've got to prove that I haven't got it. And that's the real burden of proof. So that's the income side. But the deductibility side is the big one, because where income comes in, it's all traceable. You might have to argue whether it's a gift or not, but we won't go there. With the deductibility, you're spending a lot of things that are private. And we know private, whether it's going to the doctors, even though if you need a medical certificate to work, or, if you're wearing your casual clothing, or someone said that black leggings isn't in anymore, you're not allowed to wear them. But, all that active wear and things like that even though, you need to be fit or whatever to do things, all that stuff, haircuts, all private. So there's a lot of money, rent, and mortgage repayments, a lot of that money that goes through your account, of course, is private. So therefore, there's only a small amount that's an available deduction. So therefore, you've got to have some sort of proof, substantiation. And that's where the question comes from now to the ATO. The ATO will then come to you and go, hey, that looks a little bit heavy on the deductions. Prove it. So it's only if the roulette wheel spins and your number comes up because there's something a little bit suspicious with something that you've put in. So the number looks suspicious. The ATO will come with a please explain letter.
Yeah.
And that's when you've got to prove it, Lizzie.
Yeah. And I was going to say, this is where it's probably a good point to raise that when we lodge a tax return, ATO officers are not vetting the contents internally before they issue a refund or the assessment, the notice of assessment here. The self-assessment system doesn't quite work with that particular individuals, so that you can lodge and the commissioner can accept what you lodge and do this, and then after the fact, through their data matching analysis processes, look to whether that your case is flagged for audit, for example, and you'll get that email or that letter requesting that evidence, and the onus is on you. Or they could issue a default assessment if you failed to actually lodge, and provide what they see as your taxable income figures, and therefore the tax payable. And the proof then is on you also to prove that the ATO is not correct in their estimate.
And that's a really important point, Lizzie, because if you delay lodging so much that, we're talking about years if they give you a default assessment, right? It's not like you miss your deadline, the 1st of November and they're offering you a default assessment, but you've got to prove that the default assessment isn't correct with default assessments. And we're finding with a lot of people being quite lethargic in lodging their tax returns, the default assessments are coming thick and fast. And remember, with that one, you've got to prove that the number the ATO come up with, they don't have to prove that number's right. You have to prove that it's wrong, which is really, really interesting. And the other thing that's really important with this, we seem to be talking about income tax, and it just issues, if you're an individual, issue a notice of assessment, the money just comes back to you, or you say, here's my payable. The only time it gets held up is if an individual's got Centrelink debt. So it says, I'm going to go look at other departments, because if you've got a debt somewhere else, there goes your refund. But the big thing that's happening at the moment that's highlighting that it's a self-assessment system is BASs, business activity statements, right? And that is a huge one at the moment, because if you start a business, as we know, you're going to spend more money before you get money in, which means there's a big potential that you'll get a GST refund. And the self-assessment system works exactly the same way. Every quarter or every month, most smaller businesses put in their business activity statements every quarter. You put a quarter of put your BAS in, you get a refund. Is it? Again, you don't need to put in receipts. You don't need to prove anything. There's no balance sheet or anything like that. And that's Project Protego.
Yeah. I was going to say, this is what's been in the media a lot lately, that this goes to the contrasting issues of having accessibility, digitalized, simplified processes to lodge these things, which are really good for taxpayers. But then for those that are doing the wrong thing, they can get these massive GST refunds, spend all the money. By the time the ATO can chase this up and find that there's fraud and problems occurring, sometimes the money's no longer there. They can't recover that amount that's lost. And so that's a real issue for government. And what to do to tackle that trade-off of kind of that quick and simple, that digitalized processes, whilst catching the bad actors that are doing the wrong thing. It's a really hard kind of balance to strike here.
And you look at the follow-up as well, Lizzie, as well. So we know that, simple returns have got the 2 years, more complex returns have got the 4 years. You can't claim GST refunds after 4 years. So that's sort of the time frame of any sort of amendment that can be done by the taxpayer or the ATO, unless it's fraud and evasion. I mean, there's always caveats with tax law. We keep going on with those things. But when you look at any sort of intervention by the ATO with the please explain letters, and my high level observation, this is a bit crowdsourcing, so apologies for you being very academic, but we're looking at it from when the event occurred to when it actually gets prosecuted. Sometimes it's 7 or 8 years. And as you said, those people have probably spent the money. And it doesn't matter whether it's income tax refunds or they've tried to, adjust the tax system for evasion or something like that. If it's going to take that long to do, that's roughly the time frame. If you looked at case law that we do, the income year that we're looking at plus 7 or 8 is roughly what we're looking at by the time it gets to any of the court system. The money's well and truly gone, right? So it'd be interesting to look at as well, and you see it a lot, even with tax agents that are doing the wrong thing, or there's been a few cases more recently about unregistered tax agents and saying we're going to fine you for contempt of court and all this sort of thing. They haven't got the money to pay it, so they go bankrupt. So you might say, oh, there's a big win for the ATO and a big win for the TPP, but the poor person's got no money. They've gone bankrupt, so they're not going to pay it anyway.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So this kind of leads, I guess, nicely into the next question is how do we balance and try and create a good, fair, honest system? And that probably leads me to the concept of the ATO Charter. So can you provide listeners with a brief overview of what the ATO Charter is all about?
Yeah, the ATO. It used to be called the Taxpayer Charter, didn't it?
Yeah, it's just recently been
pages and pages and pages. And now it's come down to, I think it's only 2 sides, I think now, isn't it, Lizzie, about that? And it's more, look, the ATO can I say they're a weird beast? Am I allowed to be as bold as saying that? Because they're not accountable for anyone. There's a few rummages about saying there should be a Royal Commission into the ATO. They're basically a statutory body without any oversight. So the ATO Charter is meant to protect us, the taxpayer, just say in short, the ATO has to act as a model litigant, a model citizen, do all the right thing. Don't do anything sneaky. If you've watched a lot of, procedural dramas in courtrooms and things like that, the ATO don't like to do any sneaky or do any trips and traps to pick us up. And that's really what it is. They've got to agree to do everything that they talk about. So with every type of interaction we have with the ATO, there's a standard service period. And that's what they're meant to adhere to. So the Taxpayer Charter, what can we say? It's like I like to call it their mission statement a bit. It's like what they espouse to, but are they really held accountable to it? It's a bit hard at the moment. And, even moving into things like the Inspector General of Tax, or the Tax Ombudsman, as Ruth Owen likes to be called now. She seems to be using that title. She wears 2 hats. It's very much around, hey, ATO, let's just keep to your knitting, do what you're meant to be doing and deliver on your charter, which is really what we're trying to do. But it's another public service department. They're overworked and under-resourced, as we all know. And Leslie, I sort of think about it as well. To me, it's a bit like, I love my good analogies. It's a bit like drug cheating in sport. This is how I look at it, right? So you've got people that have, dosed themselves up or whatever, and they get tested, but the crims are better than the people that are doing the testing, if I can put it that way. So this is how you're looking at me strange, going, where are you going with this? But I'm just sort of saying that I truly believe there are cleverer people outside of the ATO than inside the ATO. Okay, so when we approach the ATO, you're probably talking to someone, especially, not when we get to commissioner, assistant commissioner, but your general tax agent or your general tax professional talking to someone into the ATO, you know a lot more than they do. Right? So this is where the issue is. And I think that's where we get a little bit upset about the charter going, hey guys, up your service standard, please. And that's a whole new investigation.
Yeah, the Inspector General Tax Ombudsman has recently come out with a report and recommendations on the tax phone line services being provided, which do raise these issues. So they are genuine issues that are being faced by the tax agent profession in particular. But I do want to also, just to balance that, the comments here in that the ATO do get a lot of flack. They do, get that kind of negative viewpoints, but they are also doing a really tough job as well. So probably a shout out to the ATO officers as well, because I don't imagine it's an easy job. It's really tough, particularly even if you're beginning to work at the ATO and the graduate programs. If you're put on those phone lines, I suspect you're probably getting some really difficult calls as well. So recognizing the people behind the systems as well, just to provide a bit of balance there. That's fair enough. Yeah.
They did say that the average tenure at the ATO at the moment is 12 months worth of experience. So you've got to balance all that out, right? So there's people that know a lot of things. But again, as I said, over-resourced, underpaid. It's just another government department. It's a bureaucracy. They've got the protection, right? So they've got to protect us, and they are.
Yeah. So as a final question to wrap up this episode, what other support? We've just talked about the Inspector General Tax Ombudsman. Did you want to expand a little bit on that? So if taxpayers are seeking support in their tax compliance obligations, they've obviously got tax agents. Did you want to expand just finally on the other support that may be on offer for the tax admin?
Yeah, look, I think the best support is the ATO though, Lizzie.
Yeah.
I really believe that is where the worst thing someone can do is get a please explain communication and put their head in the sand. Okay, directed penalty notices is one thing that rings alarm bells. You've only got a limited amount of time to act to that. Otherwise, the director's on the hook for the company debt. So the best support is the ATO. They do a brilliant job in supporting. However, if it gets to a point where you feel that they're not obeying their charter, that's when you need to escalate it. But it's still within the ATO. You want to go through all the way through to the complaints process in the ATO if you feel like you're not getting heard. Okay. And we're not talking about simple things. We're talking about you've got to first go through every steps you can at the ATO. Don't say the ATO isn't doing their job unless you've given them a chance to do their job. Okay, so that's what you need to do first. Then what happens is you look at what you need for support. Okay, if it's before anything happens, please use a tax professional. Okay, don't use ChatGPT or anything like that because you're not really sure what question to ask, right? And LLM AIs are always very pleasing, right? So ask a professional, and the advice isn't very expensive. I think of us tax professionals as like the general practitioner, and then we basically direct you off to whatever specialty you need. And a lot of times I say to my clients, go see a lawyer about this. I am not a lawyer. I cannot provide legal advice. They go, but Lisa, that'll be expensive. I said, you'll be shocked. It'll probably be about on par with my fees or only slightly more. So go to the right expert. And in tax, it's much better off, as you know, Lizzie, if, do your planning on the 1st of June for that year. Don't do your planning, on the 31st of December afterwards, or, the 30th of October, and you got to lodge your tax return on the 31st of October if you're lodging yourself. Right. So you're much better off getting advice beforehand. But if you've gone, whoops, I need forgiveness, go all the way through to the ATO as far as you can, right? And look at what you can do. And then if you're not getting the answer, that's when you might escalate to the Inspector General of Tax, Tax Ombudsman, to say, hey, I've gone through as much as I can with the ATO. And that's what they ask you. They say, have you tried to solve it within the ATO first? And then you can go from there.
Yeah.
And that's the other avenue that you can do. And, the iGot website's really great. You just put it in, give them lots of feedback. They look after the tax agents, the tax professionals, as well as the taxpayers. And what they're trying to do is hold the ATO to account for different things. So the big flavour of at the moment is vulnerability framework, domestic violence, coercive control, sexually transmitted debt, all those things, because we know that a lot of family-run businesses are run by, spouses that are involved with it, and if that relationship separates, then things can get a little bit messy, right? Things end bad. That's why things end. And so that's what we've got with. And they're the two main ones that you do. But I really think you need to deal with it with the ATO. They're the ones that are in control of it. And if you follow the rules correctly, and as you know, what do I do if I'm going to ask for remittance of GIC or remittance of a penalty because someone hasn't lodged on time? I go to the PSLA. I go to the ATO document, right? Because the charter is the high-level mission statement, and as we were talking about, you go to the document that says, okay, what are the rules of engagement? That's the great thing about the ATO. You shouldn't really complain about them because they've got they tell you what questions they're going to ask. They tell you the rules that they're going to do with the PSLAs on remittance of GRC or remittance of penalties or anything like that. And then what you can say, well, hang on, paragraph 36 of that PSLA says this. And then they can go, okay, I understand what we're doing. But again, the reason that you sometimes, I think, have some issues with the ATO is that you've left it too late.
Yeah.
Right. If you've engaged early, you've done everything. Most people have a fabulous outcome with the ATO and they're quite reasonable. But if you've got, 5 years worth of tax returns and you owe them $100,000, well, you've been doing the wrong thing. So you've got to come up with the best option. You're not going to come up with a good option.
Yeah. And just a heads up for those that may not be aware that those that don't have the financial capacity to see a tax agent, there are also tax clinics around Australia as well that do essentially pro bono work. If you meet that kind of financial or vulnerability type classifications, they're very welcoming and can support you through some of these issues and dealing with the ATO in the administration issues you may be facing. So with that, Lisa, did you have any one final piece of interesting fact or comment to make before we wrap up?
We emphasised it enough, but engage early and engage quickly, and I think that's the main thing with the ATO. That's what I would definitely suggest. And probably the other real take-home message that I like to say: whoever signs the tax return, it's their responsibility to make sure that it's right. You cannot outsource that responsibility. You've signed it.
Yeah, so a personal service announcement, read the terms and conditions. If you're signing something, make sure you know what it is.
Well, T's and C's on using all your social media accounts as well, Liz.
Yeah,
you'd be horrified if you read
my world.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So that's it for this episode of Taxed and Confused, where the rules are rigid, the paperwork is endless, and the burden of proof is all yours. If you enjoyed today's deep dive into tax admin, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's just as confused as we are. And remember, this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It's not tax advice, and we're not your tax agents. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious, stay compliant, and stay just a little bit taxed and confused.